The grace and gratitude. As the seasons change from summer into fall, we begin to think of harvests even in parts of the country where the leaves on trees barely change color. Pumpkin pies are and perfectly roasted turkeys grace the covers of magazines, and our thoughts turn to Thanksgiving dinner before the last piece of Halloween candy is consumed. Thousands of people travel far and wide to be with their families on this day, because for years, a picture postcard myth has promoted that everyone is going to be sitting down at the dining room table with the traditional family dinner. The day holds such significance with Americans that with respect to travel, the holiday is often the busiest of the year, only second in popularity to Christmas. With this holiday being considered the most welcoming, it's quite common for coworkers and casual acquaintances to be invited to dinner for the first time on Thanksgiving Day. But Thanksgiving is a complex holiday. While many folks look forward to gathering around a table with family in celebration of this true American holiday, for various reasons, there are an equal number of people who have no one to celebrate with. Moreover, without the concerted effort of soup kitchens, various organizations, and churches of all denominations, many wouldn't have anything to eat at all. Therefore, gratitude and joviality are in tandem with sadness and depression. Like most American children that grew up in this country in the 50s and 60s, even the 70s, I was taught that we celebrated this holiday in memory of the first harvest feast held in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1621. The version of the story went something like this. Thanksgiving commemorates the way the pilgrims of Plymouth, Mass., fresh off the Mayflower, celebrated the harvest by enjoying a potluck-style dinner with their friendly Indian neighbors. The old adage that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery doesn't apply when it comes to appropriating another's culture. But in many classrooms, the youngest children dressed up as pilgrims and Indians for Thanksgiving pageants. I remember my children bringing home the hand-traced, brightly colored turkey pictures that graced the dinner table or hung on the refrigerator to mark the day. However, over the years, through research and expanding social consciousness, many people began questioning the accuracy of the story we learned as children about the first harvest feast. Scholars believe the meal known as the first Thanksgiving took place at some point during the fall of 1621 in the recently founded Plymouth colony. But that story reflects neither the 17th century truth nor the 21st century understanding of it. Rather, the American public memory of Thanksgiving is a story about the 19th century. So what is the reality of that feast? New England colonists were accustomed to regularly celebrating Thanksgiving days of prayer, thanking God for blessings such as military victory or the end of a drought. And according to historian David J. Silverman, author of This Land is Their Land, the Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the troubled history of Thanksgiving, this gathering was neither the first encounter between the colonists and the Native Americans, nor was it purely a happy moment. Silverman informs that a mysterious epidemic spread through contact with the Europeans had decimated the Wampanoag population. So they reached out to the English at Plymouth because they wanted allies and access to European military weapons in case they needed to defend themselves against their rivals, the Narragansett. However, many points of history are unclear, with conflicting records. Were they there to enjoy a nice meal with their European friends? Were they there to try to get help from the settlers to aid their tribes dying of disease and conflict since settler arrival? Or was the tribe perhaps brought there by force and threat? While it's true that the famous meal in 1621 was peaceful, it wasn't a lasting peace, because war between the settlers and Wampanoag broke out in the 1670s. For more than 2 centuries, days of Thanksgiving were celebrated by individual colonies and states, but it wasn't until 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, that President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a national Thanksgiving Day to be held each November. Now, in this proclamation, he entreated all Americans to ask God to, and I quote, commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation, end of quote. He scheduled Thanksgiving for the final Thursday in November, and it was celebrated on that day every year until 1939, when another president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, moved the holiday up a week in an attempt to spur retail sales during the Great Depression. The origins of this holiday, like so much of this country's history, is painfully complex. From the early 17th century, when European settlers landed on the shores of the present-day United States, to nearly the dawn of the 20th century, white settlers and soldiers waged an unrelenting war to claim the lands that Native Americans had long known as their own. For many Native people in our time, the day called Thanksgiving has become a day of mourning for the hundreds of years of losses suffered by their people. So, is this national American holiday worthy of honoring? How do we reconcile the dilemma between commemorating colonization and celebrating gratitude? The late poet Maya Angelou reminds us that when you know better, you do better. She continues saying that it is freeing for anyone who has made a mistake. Therefore, I contend that truth and reconciliation is key. To be silent now is to be complicit, and reconciliation cannot live without truth. Moreover, it's not something that can be done in a day. Days must become weeks, and weeks must become years. For change to take place, it must take root and be part of our everyday lives, particularly in our schools. Teaching about Thanksgiving in a socially responsible way means that educators accept the ethical obligation to provide students with accurate information and to reject traditions that sustain harmful stereotypes about indigenous people. Incomplete representations of Native Americans in history books tend to reinforce stereotypes and myths that can inform the way we think about people for life. Just as our congregations that want to take intentional steps to be more inclusive of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, we can be intentional in learning more about the culture of people native to the land that we live on. Moreover, what is taught does not have to be relegated to history or social studies. Children can be taught about Native American culture through art and their relationship to the earth and the environment. It's also important to make institutional changes in our legislation and in our legal system. Most importantly, changes in our hearts. In every perfection and imperfection, ultimate grace is at the heart of every matter, presenting choices to inquiring hearts in moments of every right and wrong. Grace might be the great spirit to free us from our hindrances and make visible the voiceless and lay what is hidden before us to clarify what is confusing. Ironically, teachers have to unlearn what they have been taught about Native Americans. But how to teach the past is very controversial. Influenced by social and political values, as well as a community's demographic makeup, what students learn in different school districts varies a lot across the country. Some claim seeing bias in the opposite direction and lobby against so-called revisionist history and critical race theory. However, as a nation, they do a disservice to us all because there's much more of an opportunity to heal when we speak frankly and truthfully about the past. The goal is not to make Americans feel guilty, but to educate and bring awareness to the injustices that Native people have fought to overcome and continue to endure. From the imprisonment of Native men to the displacement of families and tribes across the country, and to the lack of federal recognition given to tribes. The sentiment of Thanksgiving itself is a positive one because the day offers a unique opportunity for many to have a day devoted solely to be with people they love, to share a meal together, and express gratitude for what is. However, the idea of Thanksgiving being a just perfect day ignores a heavy part of American history. And not every family can celebrate together, which is due to some of America's oppressive systems. So as you sit down to your gathered meal, consider that none of our stories are ever simple, that what we know rarely looks quite like what happened, that our location in history and myth can waver as our understandings change. But consider also that we belong to these myths, this history, that we are changed every time we allow ourselves to be moved by what has come before. And in addition to practicing gratitude and generosity, one aspect of celebrating is to acknowledge the original caretakers and inhabitants of the land upon which we are celebrating. We can also use President Lincoln's template by imploring the spirit of life and love to commend tender care to all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable strife that makes up daily life. Moreover, as we continue to bear witness to the divisiveness between Americans on everything racially, culturally, and politically, we need to work towards healing the wounds of the nation, now more than ever. From my heart to yours, may it be so.